Welcome to Midnight Story. When the night falls silent and shadows grow longer, this is where horror and mystery begin. Real stories, urban legends, secrets never told. Be prepared, because something unseen might be watching you. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and of course subscribe, so you never miss the next terrifying tale. Because here, every midnight has a story. I first heard of Dusenmera, read Hamlet, through a handwritten letter sent by Father Anton, a Catholic priest who was stationed in a neighboring district. The letter was brief but urgent. Villagers had begun disappearing, and rumors of an underground satanic cult had spread like wildfire. As an investigative journalist specializing in paranormal and true crime cases, I felt compelled to travel there immediately. On a humid afternoon in late May 2024, I boarded a battered minibus bound for Dusenmera. The moment I stepped off, I felt a weight in the air, as if the entire village exhaled a silent plea for help. No one approached me. Instead, they stared, eyes hollow, faces lined with fear. Dusenmera lay cradled between forested hills that appeared almost black under the afternoon sun. The houses, simple wooden structures with itchy thatched roofs, were arranged unevenly around a cracked dirt square. I made my way to a small guest house run by an elderly couple, Pak Hassan and Bu Ratna. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward the forest every few seconds. After I introduced myself and explained I was there to investigate the disappearances, they exchanged wary glances. "Be careful," Bu Ratna whispered. "They don't like strangers." That night, I lay awake listening to an unbroken chorus of cicadas. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, but it sounded more like a shriek than a warning. The next morning, I visited the village square, where a few men sat under the shade of a lone banyan tree. One of them, Pak Ridwin, told me about the first disappearance. His niece, 8-year-old Sidi, had vanished 3 weeks earlier. He showed me her last known location, near the old cemetery just beyond the forest's edge. According to villagers, she had been lured by a group chanting in strange tongues. I asked for details. "They wore black robes and carried torches," he said, voice trembling. "I saw them from afar, but when I approached, they vanished into the trees." I took notes and photographs of the cemetery's weather-beaten gravestones, some leaning at impossible angles. There was something overwhelmingly oppressive about the place, as though the dead themselves were watching. That evening, I returned to the guest house to find a small boy standing by my door. He was barefoot, wearing tattered shorts, and his eyes were glazed as if he'd seen a ghost. "They're coming," he whispered, voice barely audible. I asked him to explain, but he only raised a finger to his lips before vanishing into the dark alley between huts. I chased after him, but the alley was empty. The next morning, I tried to locate him, but no one in the village admitted to seeing him. I realized I was gripped by fear, too. Someone or something didn't want me here. I sought out Father Anton at the small chapel on the village's southwestern edge. The chapel's doors hung unevenly on their hinges, and a single lamp flickered inside. Anton was thin, with deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect centuries of sorrow. He revealed that the villagers had practiced animistic rituals long before Islam and Christianity arrived in the region. But 50 years ago, a radical sect claiming to worship a dark entity known as Sang Hitam, the Black One, had emerged. They buried a sealed chamber beneath the oldest banyan tree in the graveyard. Anton confessed that he and other local clergy had tried to prevent the resurgence of these rituals, but their efforts had been thwarted by fear and intimidation. He handed me a faded photograph of a group of villagers in black robes, standing around the banyan tree. Taken, he said, in 1974, just before the group vanished. Early the next morning, I entered the cemetery alone, armed with a flashlight and voice recorder. Mounds of overgrown grass hid most of the gravestones. At the center stood the ancient banyan, its massive roots twisting into the earth like skeletal fingers. I felt a chill as I circled the tree, noting several shallow holes at its base. Freshly dug, as though someone had tried to unearth something. A sudden breeze whispered through the branches, but the surrounding forest was still. I pressed the recorder to my lips and recited the names of the missing children. Siddhi, Hendra, Inda. As soon as I finished speaking, the flashlight flickered and died. In the pitch-black darkness, I thought I heard chanting, like a song sung in a dead language. I stumbled back toward the guest house, heart hammering. Across the street from the cemetery, a herder named Pak Darmo kept a small herd of goats. He told me he had lost his brother, Hendra, 2 nights prior. Hendra had gone to the graves to collect firewood and never returned. I visited their modest hut, a single room where a low cot and cooking hearth sat under a woven bamboo roof. On a makeshift altar lay photographs of Hendra alongside offerings of rice and incense. "We call on Sanghitam to protect us," Darmo said, tears staining his cheeks. "But sometimes he takes what he wants." He handed me a scrap of paper, Hendra's final diary entry. It read, "I followed the sound of drums. I think they want me to join them. I feel something touching my mind, leading me back to the banyan." I shivered. The diary pages were stained with tears, or blood. That night, I dreamt of the banyan tree. In my dream, its roots coiled around me, and a deep voice whispered in my ear, "You cannot leave." I awoke drenched in sweat to find a small talisman on my bedside table. A crudely carved wooden disc etched with a 3-toed claw symbol. I did not remember placing it there. I showed it to Pak Hassan in the morning. His face went pale. He snatched it away and buried it in the courtyard. "Evil," he muttered. "Take it back to the chapel." When I tried to return it to Father Anton, the priest refused, saying any object with that symbol was a conduit for dark forces. I felt exposed, as if my very presence in the village had grated against something unseen. On the 3rd day, word spread that the village council would convene in the main hall near the square. Accompanied by Father Anton, I joined the meeting. 12 elders seated on bamboo mats under a thatched roof. Nyai Sari, the oldest member, wore a faded batik sarong and smoked a clove cigarette. She spoke first. "We know why you're here, but our traditions, our secrets, are not for outsiders." I tried to ask about the recent disappearances and the chupacabra-like rumors, but the elders dismissed me with pointed glances and forced smiles. Their silence felt like a wall. As I left, I overheard 2 elders whispering that the outsider would tip the balance. I wasn't sure if they meant my presence would help the village, or doom it. Late that afternoon, I found a hidden path behind the council hall, overgrown with vines and thorny shrubs. It led downhill to a cave entrance partially concealed by fallen branches. The air inside was cool and damp. Mold clung to the walls. Half a kilometer in, I discovered an underground chamber. Its floor was littered with broken pottery, dried blood, and candles long since extinguished. In the center lay a stone slab engraved with the 3-toed claw symbol. I knelt and brushed aside debris to reveal an inscription in Old Javanese. Craning to read it, I whispered, "By this blood, we serve the Black One." My flashlight flickered. I felt a presence behind me, heavy and malevolent. I fled, leaving my recorder behind. And when I returned the next day, the chamber had collapsed. By the 7th day, I was convinced something terrible was imminent. I set up surveillance cameras around the cemetery to capture any nocturnal activity. At midnight, I watched as villagers, mostly young men with hollow eyes, filed out of their homes, carrying torches and drums. Their movements were synchronized, almost mechanical. They circled the banyan tree, chanting in an archaic dialect. A single lantern hung from a low branch, illuminating a small, trembling form bound at the stump. Inda, a 12-year-old girl. I watched in horror as a man in a black robe raised a ceremonial dagger. Before he could strike, I rushed toward the edge of the cemetery, capturing everything on video. At that moment, the chanting stopped. The man lowered his dagger, muttered something I couldn't translate, and Inda was released. She ran, tears streaming. The procession dispersed like mist. I felt their eyes on me, but no one chased. In the early hours, I found Inda huddled near the cemetery entrance, trembling. She wore a white dress stained with dirt, and her eyes looked far older than her 12 years. I wrapped her in my jacket and took her to the chapel. Father Anton held her as she sobbed. They forced me to sing their song. They said the Black One demanded a soul. Her voice shook. When I refused, they nearly stabbed me, but then they let me go. They said it was only the beginning. She showed me a small brass key she had taken from one of the robes. They told me it opens the door to Sanghitam's world. My blood ran cold. With that key in hand, I realized the cult's power was far more extensive than mere superstition. At dawn, I inspected the brass key. It was old, pitted with corrosion and rust, but engraved with the three-toed claw symbol. I feared what it might unlock. Father Anton insisted we destroy it. I nearly threw it into the small fire pit beside the chapel. But as the flames licked the metal, they flickered uncontrollably, as if resisting. I yanked it away, my hand scorching. We wrapped the key in a white cloth and buried it at the foot of the altar, praying over it. Father Anton told me, "Never speak of this to anyone. The moment they know we have the key, they will stop at nothing." I nodded, though I felt the weight of that key would haunt me forever. Over the next 2 nights, I remained in the chapel, unable to sleep. Around midnight, I heard faint scratching against the wooden panels, followed by muffled whispers. I turned on my recorder, voices speaking in tongues, punctuated by low chants. I peeked through the small window and saw shadows moving outside. Figures with gaunt faces and empty eyes. They were circling the chapel, their heads bowed. My heart pounded as they pressed against the walls, then suddenly retreated into the darkness. The next morning, I found fresh claw marks on the chapel's outer door. 3 long, parallel gouges. I documented everything, but no one else believed me. They said the scratches must have come from a wild animal. On the 10th day, I interviewed several villagers who had not been to the midnight gathering. Each told of an oppressive force that clung to the air. An electric tension that made the hair on their arms stand on end. One elderly woman, Maksari, described seeing apparitions of long-dead ancestors wandering the lanes at dusk. "They're searching for peace," she said, her voice hollow. "But we cannot give it to them until Sanghitam is bound again." I pressed her about the binding ritual. She replied, "That ritual was performed centuries ago by our ancestors. They sealed him beneath the banyan tree. But now the seal is weakening." Her words confirmed my growing dread. The cult sought to break the seal, and I was caught in the middle. A sudden storm rolled in late one afternoon, sending torrents of rain and panic through the village. Lightning illuminated the hills as thunder shook the ground. During the storm, a young man named Yusuf vanished from his home. His family claimed they heard an unearthly scream and saw a hooded figure dragging him into the forest. I joined a search party as they combed the edge of the jungle by flashlight. We found his sandals crushed beneath a banyan root, but no sign of Yusuf. At dawn, Father Anton found my recorder on his desk. Its battery drained, but the tape still running. I played it back. A woman's voice, sobbing softly, calling my name. Then silence. I froze. The voice wasn't from that night. It was from months ago, recorded somewhere else entirely. I didn't know whose voice it was, but I knew it was a warning. 2 nights later, I returned to the cemetery, determined to find evidence of an underground chamber. I brought a small metal detector and a shovel. As I neared the banyan tree, the detector's beeping grew frantic. I dug at a spot where tree roots had lifted the soil. Within minutes, the shovel struck something solid. A stone slab, faintly marked with the 3-toed claw. I pried it loose and the earth beneath collapsed, revealing a narrow passage. My flashlight revealed damp walls covered in ancient inscriptions. I climbed down and found myself in a chamber, altar at the center, dried blood still visible on its surface. I felt an icy presence and shone my light toward the chamber entrance. There, standing just outside, was a figure in a black robe, hood drawn over its face. I turned and fled, heart pounding, tripping over rocks and roots until I burst into the storm-soaked night. I reached the chapel drenched and gasping for breath. Father Anton met me at the door, his eyes wide with concern. I stammered out my experience, showing him the altar stones I had sketched and photographed earlier. He handed me a vial of holy water and told me to recite the Psalms. As I did, the wind outside howled, and the chapel's windows rattled as if something was trying to break in. Father Anton held the vial above my head and sprinkled the water, chanting in Latin. The disturbances ceased abruptly. We stood in silence, the weight of what I had uncovered pressing down on us both. Anton said, "You have risked your life to reveal this. We must act quickly before the cult resurfaces fully." Over the next day, Father Anton and I confronted the village council with my evidence. The photographs, the recorded chants, the notes on the cave chamber. At first, they denied everything, but under mounting pressure, Nyaisari finally confessed. Several families had belonged to the original cult, passed down through generations. They believed that by sacrificing innocents, they could invoke Sanghitam's favor and gain prosperity. Their numbers had dwindled over the decades, but recent disappearances had rejuvenated them. The council admitted they had been complicit, providing cover and turning a blind eye. Once they believed the binding ritual at the banyan tree had failed, they welcomed the cult's return. The confession shook me. The terror was not the work of strangers, but of neighbors and friends. On June 1st, 2024, Father Anton gathered the remaining villagers in the chapel's courtyard. We carried the dismantled altar stones and the brass key, now sealed in lead, and marched to the banyan tree despite the pouring rain. As the thunder rolled, Anton spoke of redemption and forgiveness, urging the villagers to renounce their pact with Sanghitam. We placed the brass key inside a clay pot filled with holy oil and wrapped the pot in white cloth. The villagers circled the tree, chanting prayers in unison, combining Islamic dua, Christian psalms, and indigenous mantras. At midnight, lightning struck the banyan's tallest root, revealing a fissure in the earth. I watched in awe as a blinding light erupted, sealing the fissure and causing the banyan's roots to pulsate once, as if sighing in relief. When the light faded, the brass key dissolved into ash, the pot shattered without a sound, and the altar stones recombined into the earth. The chanting stopped. An eerie silence fell across the cemetery. The villagers, some weeping, some kneeling, rose and vowed to keep the story alive, so the seal would never weaken again. As dawn broke on June 2nd, 2024, I left Dusun Mera with a heavy heart and a recorder full of testimony. I have since published my findings, but I know the real horror lies in the knowledge that the darkness almost broke free, and that it lives in the hearts of men who choose power over compassion. I returned to Dusun Mera 6 months later. The banyan grove was peaceful. The villagers tended their graves and held morning prayers. Yet whenever I passed the chapel, I felt eyes upon me, as if unseen watchers winked out at my approach. In my possession, I still carry a single grain of ash, believed to be the last remnant of the brass key. At times, late at night, I swear I feel its heat in my pocket, as though it remembers the power it once held. The villagers warned me, beware the temptation to use it. I buried the ash beneath an ancient altar in my own hometown, hoping it would never see the light again. But every so often, in my dreams, I stand before that banyan tree, alone with the chanting just beyond hearing, and the collective breath of Dusun Mera resting on my shoulders.